Welcome back to our audience to the Go AI podcast. We have a very special guest today. Would you mind introducing yourself, telling us who you are and who you're with?
So I'm Richard Savoie, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Adiona Tech, and we do optimization AI for logistics and transport. So millions of deliveries flow through our platform for lots of brands like Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Amazon DSPs, post offices. That basically we create optimized routing dynamically for them to reduce their emissions, reduce their costs, and provide a better experience for their workforce as well.
And this is, as I understand, kind of an AI first company. Is that how you describe it? Where it's from the ground up, you were thinking about including AI in transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. My background is actually in medical devices. So I was an electrical engineer and developing and commercializing medical devices out of the research world. And through the research world, I was exposed to machine learning, more than a decade ago, and knew that it was going to have lots of interesting applications. And so we were very, shall we say, machine learning focused initially. But then my co-founder is a PhD researcher in AI and with a specific focus on optimization using AI. So it's a really interesting combination of traditional operations research, algorithms and routing types of strategies that have been researched for nearly 100 years now, since the Industrial Revolution, then merged with the extreme power of agentic AI to automate things that previously were still required a lot of manual work.
And beyond automation, what have been the fruits of that merging?
Well, there's a hidden problem in transport, a hidden inefficiency problem. And if you look globally at some of the bigger markets, UK, US, Australia, vehicles that do transport, so that your typical delivery trucks that you see running around your city, on average, they're only 60% full at any given time. There's 40% gain to be had just in filling out the trucks. Now, if you go back up the stream and figure out why that is, and you look at the complexity of manufacturing things and shipping them to distribution centers and then getting them out last mile, it's just an extraordinarily difficult and complex problem to solve. Even just looking at a single delivery van with 100 deliveries that they need to make, there are billions of different permutations of how they could do that. And so that's where operations mathematics and algorithmic research combined with AI creates this opportunity to improve that efficiency. And then we look at the real world impact of that. Well, transport is the second largest greenhouse gas emitting sector in the world. And as the grid decarbonizes globally, it's going to be the number one emissions sector by 2030. And commercial fleets are about half of that. So it's more straightforward to go and purchase an electric vehicle and swap out your gas powered vehicle with that as an individual user. But for logistics fleets, it's much more complicated. And that's the problem that we are using AI to solve.
For business owners who rely on good transportation for their bottom line, what should they know about using AI in transportation before they make the leap into an integration?
That's a great question because every organization that we work with is very sensitive to their P&L. They're very sensitive to any threat to on-time in full performance for their customers. So any kind of efficiency initiative or sustainability initiative has to be extremely shrewd at looking at what the potential revenue impact is, and then what the short-term and long-term cost impacts are. So this is why efficiency solutions in general can be very hard to sell to business owners because they understand and we understand that oftentimes you're making an investment in something that you're not going to see a return on immediately. It's going to take time for that payback parity to be achieved. So one of the things that we encourage our customers to do right away and we support them to do is to simulate. So the core of our solutions is a simulation engine. And when a customer engages with us and they send us some historical data that they want to understand, well, how could we have been more efficient these deliveries that we did last week? They can simulate them in our product, in our solution set, so that they can understand really clearly that timeline. What is the immediate impact that could be had? Is there a low-hanging fruit that could be had that will get an immediate return on investment? And then what are the longer term strategies that will result in even more compound gains? So I think that's where the world is at, especially with the proliferation of AI. It's much easier now to do those types of simulations and have them be very realistic than it used to be even 10 years ago, where, to be honest, a lot of these types of efficiency programs for businesses were done by consultants. And you'd get a, a fancy PowerPoint deck with a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of assumptions, and you wouldn't know for sure whether that return on investment was going to be accurate. Whereas now we can provide a very clear, very accurate picture of what that ROI is going to be over a very clear timeline.
So I did use the word businesses, which is so broad, but you count among your client list Coca-Cola, the Australia Post. I mean, those alone are two very different industries. Although, of course, there can be, if you Venn diagram it out, I'm sure in transportation needs there are some similarities. But as an AI services provider, what have you learned about implementing AI across a bunch of different industries?
That's really interesting to me how there are these synergies across different industries, different verticals, but also very clear delineations in operational constraints. And that's just a fancy way of saying that no two businesses run alike. And even within the same vertical, you can have very significant differences as to how one postal operator will operate from another in different countries, or how one fast-moving consumer goods or food company will operate from another. And there's so much history to these old organizations, so many internal tools that they've built, internal processes that they're dependent on, specific vendors in their software and IT ecosystem that they've been locked into, and they've got a business process that runs according to the way that that tool runs. So we really love finding those synergies. And one of the things that's very important to us, especially from an AI context, is you get the best results in AI when you train it with specific tasks, the things that have very clear boundaries on them. And so being able to break down in a consultative way the core processes of these different businesses and figure out what are the ones that are actually relevant to their margins versus what are the ones that are just business as usual, and you could swap them out with a different process and it wouldn't really matter. That's where the simulation becomes so important too, because you can stitch these different processes together end to end and figure out which ones are on the critical path to profitability, for lack of a better term, versus the other ones that aren't so core. And focus again on your Pareto principle. Focus on the 80%. The other thing that's really important to that, to what you said, Connor, is I think a lot of logistics and supply chain businesses struggle with bad clients. So here in Australia, for instance, we've got an absolute record number of insolvencies and businesses, transport businesses going into administration, closing down, going bankrupt because they've been locked into bad contracts. They can't support their margins. They misestimated the way that diesel prices would change. There are lots of different reasons, but that is so critical to the health and long-term viability of their business, being able to do a scenario analysis and say, yeah, well, this is the way that we run today, but if we were to bring on this new customer, how would that impact our efficiency? Or maybe some of our customers are actually draining us, and we should reevaluate how that looks. WiseTech Global, if you've heard of them, they're one of the biggest freight management solutions software companies, and they just did a massive pricing restructure where they went from a kind of per seat, per user license to a consumption-based license, which is much more modern in the way that we do it. And they're going to lose a lot of customers, but those customers they're going to lose are going to be the worst ones, the ones that are draining them on margins. So I think that's really important for business owners to understand as well, that you need to be looking at the big picture as well as the granular picture at the same time and meet them in the middle.
And to keep in line with the theme of like the specificity or the uniqueness of a certain business's needs for transportation, one of the consistent themes of this podcast is that data is just one of the, is foundational to good AI work being done. What do businesses need to bring to the table for an effective AI transportation solution so that they can get a good result?
Yeah, there's a lot of historical performance data that I think businesses don't necessarily keep well. That is so important to training AI models going forward. I'll give you an example. When one of the models that we built will look at the historical delivery records for your deliveries to then improve the planning of it. And so, for example, imagine that you have just created some delivery routes for a food service company, and your drivers go out into the field, they execute those deliveries. There's always going to be variations. There's going to be things that the drivers do a little differently than the plan. Those are going to be driven by changes that customers make, or traffic jams, or weather, or all sorts of other things that you can't necessarily control or predict in the planning stages. And so having a process to capture all of that information, to say, we know that based on some telematics data or app data that that delivery was late. Why was it late? Well, by the time tomorrow comes around, everyone's forgotten about that delivery. And the figuring out the reason that it was actually late will become harder and harder the farther away in the future you get from it. So we see that as being one of the critical missing pieces that a lot of businesses need to collect in order to enable AI is what changed? What went wrong? What were the variations? And maybe they don't have enough information at scale to do a root cause analysis on all of those things. And that's okay. That's where AI is really useful, is if as long as you're keeping that information, the raw data, AI can actually do a really good job of helping you with that root cause analysis. And even more importantly, creating a closed feedback loop to prevent those things in the future. But if you don't keep that historical data of what went wrong, then you're never going to be able to unlock that capability.
And so, speaking of unlocking the capabilities of AI, could you give us an example of a success story of one of your clients that demonstrates how AI can really, again, unlock capabilities for companies?
Well, one of the things that we're really excited about in this space is using agentic AI to start making more decisions on behalf of fleets, things that are typically very manual and disruption based. I think, agentic AI is just a great candidate to solve that problem. So, I'll give you an example of a customer that we were working with that delivers cold chain goods. So they have, only a certain amount of time that they can be on a truck, and there was a massive disruption in a tunnel that was leaking, and so the whole tunnel got closed down. And this is like a core conduit in their city that they need to use to get a lot of their deliveries out. And so massive disruption. And typically, what they would do, and what they'd always done, is they've got a whole team of people that get on the phone and get on WhatsApp and just start sorting it out and doing the best they can to reroute people and to figure out how they're going to get the deliveries out. And a day like that, can end up being a lost day because they'll lose products, customers will be really angry, and all that stuff. Now, the core thing that AI agency can do in that situation is to look at which decisions achieve different objectives. And so on that particular day, if I'm running cold chain, their objective is to get as much product out as possible, but that's only one dimension. Getting as much product out as possible is good, but each one of those products and each one of those delivery consignments has a different profit margin. They also have a different service level agreement with each customer. And so for a human to roll up their sleeves and look at thousands and thousands of consignments and figure out which ones are the best to reroute and prioritize, very, very difficult. But an AI agent looked at that and said, oh, actually, here's where your opportunities are to meet all of your SLAs. So being a priority because you don't want to piss off your customers. And then two, once you've met all of your SLAs or maximized the SLAs that you can meet, the remaining consignments you want to maximize on profit. You want to maximize on what's the actual margin that you're going to achieve. Very tempting for a human to say, just push out as much as you can. But if you're pushing out a lot of low value, low margin deliveries, that's not in the best interest of the business. Whereas the AI agent can say and can think, no, actually, I'm going to use a combination of live data coming back from the field, Adiona's core operational algorithms that help that agent to calculate the margin that they'll get on a specific delivery, because the AI doesn't do that natively. That's still relying on operations algorithms. But the AI can use it. And then doing that at scale and doing it iteratively to figure out the best solution for the rest of that day. And it's an absolute game changer because for them, doing it agentically was able to increase the margin by 15% on that day. So they would have made 15% less profit on that day doing it manually.
We've been talking about successes, but I'd like to spend a little bit of time on challenges here. Now, AI, it can do a lot, but it's not perfect, right? And so what would you tell business owners who are thinking about using AI for transportation? Here are the current limitations, and here's what you should know about, these challenges might pop up in using AI.
Yeah, we do get calls still, although it was more maybe a year ago, where people will email or call and say, AI is a silver bullet that can solve all of our problems. How do we do that?
Mhm.
And that was just based off the initial hype cycle. It's come back down to earth, and I think especially in supply chain, people are being much more realistic about the capability. But you do need to put together a very clear picture of, I think that last example highlights it as well. What is AI doing and what is other types of software doing? And how do they interact and how do they leverage each other? Um, I remember, early on, I wanted to understand the threat of vibe coding to us as a product, to us as a company. So I went and signed up for some vibe coding solutions and tried to replicate our product. And of course, it did a disastrous job of trying to replicate it. But I had customers that were saying the same thing. They're like, why do we need you? We can just vibe code it. And I said, well, give it a try and let me know how you do, and we'll talk about it then. So there's a number of traps that people can fall into just thinking that AI is a silver bullet that can solve all their problems because it's not. And then to just go one layer deeper into that, um, I think there's also still a real risk of humans understand based on experience decades of edge cases. And in supply chain, edge cases are extraordinarily important, just like in medicine, right? You can say, well, I've seen this type of situation 100 times before and I know how to deal with it. But one small variation on the edge case of that can totally change the revenue, the margin, the SLA compliance, the on time, whatever. And so I bring up the medical example, right? Because, a surgeon who's seen 100 thyroid tumors and has done, or 1,000 and has done that surgery, there could be one case where it's just that much closer to a blood vessel that increases the risk and the danger extraordinarily. And that experience and that understanding of having seen so many will drive the changes to how the AI needs to deal with it. But again, going back to that previous example, companies are not very good at keeping the data about those edge cases to then train the AI. So the AI will typically be trained on the 80% of what goes right day to day. And when it encounters one of those edge cases, it won't know what to do with it. And so this is the state that we're currently at, where obviously that's improving and it's accelerating. We're getting access to models that will be better at that. But at the end of the day, you're relying on somebody's imagination to say, okay, well, I can imagine how this edge case, this slight variation is going to impact the decision I make. AI can't do that yet.
And to handle these edge cases, do you have a specific human in the loop process in place for taking over?
Absolutely. So most of the AI that we deploy in production is still very much human in the loop controlled. People always have the ability to decline and change those decisions. I see that definitely changing over time, but it all comes down to accountability. And I like to joke that you can't kick AI. You can't make it feel bad. You know what I mean? And humans are programmed for accountability. If something goes wrong, you or I mess up and something goes wrong because of it, we're going to get punished one way or the other. And our manager, our boss is unfortunately, animalistically programmed to want to punish us. And that accountability psychologically, we don't have with AI. And so I think people are in supply chain are still very reluctant and will for a long time be reluctant to take the human out of the loop because then when something goes wrong, you have no accountability. There's no blame chain that you can go down. So yeah, I think human in the loop will be around for a very long time, even when AI is super, super mature, because of our psychological limitations.
I would like to get a little more into your personal perspective on just the rapidly developing industry of AI. We mentioned earlier things are coming back down to earth just in terms of perspective, but the technology just continues to develop year after year. We've seen agentic AI really kind of step it up this year, as well as performance gaps kind of closing between like largely like generative AI, like ChatGPT and Gemini. It's now kind of more neck and neck. And so I kind of wanted to ask you, what is kind of on your wish list for AI in 2026 or beyond, even for your industry or company or even just your personal role?
Wow, that's a great question. And you're right. I mean, it's evolving so quickly, and there is this arms race. Uh, and I think that my personal wish list would be more transparency. Now, I know that there's only so much transparency that you can get, and that's okay. But I think one of the big limitations in for a company like us is build versus buy. You have to decide what are you going to build, buy externally versus what you're going to build internally. And there's so much great technology out there that it's very tempting to buy lots of cool toys, for lack of a better descriptor, but things that could also be enterprise grade and you could massage into a product. But that rapidly changing nature mixed with the cowboy nature of a lot of these AI tools, because they're still very early stage, yeah, it's tricky to know what to invest in. And so more transparency is going to be critical. I was just reading, the other day about the technical debt crisis that vibe coding has created. And it's a real thing. There's so many new startups that are saying, "Oh, we've got this great product and we're AI native," but they built it on some flimsy vibe coding platform. And as soon as it attempts to go to production, it fails, and they have to then decide, is it something that we can fix? Or do we just go back to the basement? So those are the types of things that we can't fall into that trap. We're too far along to risk our future on flimsy, trendy products. That transparency is critical for us to understand what are the weaknesses. What do we need to invest in to take this particular tool and make it production grade, or to incorporate from an IDE or an SDK a version of it that we can then own and iterate and change. And that is so hard. It's such a waste of time right now, to be honest. I would spend more time evaluating and critiquing third-party tools than I would to just build something. And that's, I think, a problem. That's a big limitation for companies like us.
One of the big challenges for companies on the build or buy question is when you go with buy, you're often not gonna get like fully explainable AI where, you can readily track like, hey, what went wrong here? You might get some degree of mechanistic interpretability, but in terms of, being able to just backtrack and say, hey, why did the AI make the wrong move here? And how can we correct it? When you're dealing with these black box uh, purchasable AI systems, it's kind of just difficult to kind of get under the hood and just diagnose the issue, and from there solve the problem going forward.
Exactly. And that can be a lot of time invested in something that you eventually find out isn't going to be up to the level that you need it to be. And you should have been doing something else. And that's a tale as old as time with software, right? I mean, we've all fallen down that trap. But I think the difference is that historical software has been easier to be transparent. And it's easier for a company to say, oh, look, we know that that's a problem, but here's our roadmap of how we're going to fix it and blah, blah, blah. Whereas there's just so much chaos in the AI market right now that the last thing you want to be is on somebody else's roadmap.
That's a great line to end it on. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience before we sign off?
No, Connor, I think this is a really productive conversation. I hope it was insightful. I encourage people to come and find me on LinkedIn. I'm active there, and I love having these conversations. And so people are always welcome to find me there and have a chat or get in touch in any other way. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Richard. Go AI Podcast, another episode. Thank you for listening. Thanks for joining us, Richard. Bye.
My pleasure. Bye.